Good evening. Further to our Newsbreak story, 10 people are believed to have died after a mount-aspiring plane crashed in rugged country at the head of the Dart River Valley in Fiordland late this morning. Dunedin police have confirmed 5 were Canadians, 4 Americans, and the pilot was a New Zealander. Chief Inspector Paul Fitzharris says it could be some time before the names of the passengers are released. More about this in the Network News. Today is the 10th anniversary of the Abbotsford landslip. The 600 people evacuated, the 200 people made homeless need no reminding of that. But from disaster have come changes of benefit to victims of later disasters. John McDermott reviews a dramatic chapter in Dunedin's history.
This was what the nation saw and heard the day after. At one stage during the night, 17 people were trapped on an island in the slip.
I well remember standing at the face of the slip and looking across to the hill where the 17 people were trapped, and I watched the trees dip below the horizon and then rise above the horizon as the land just a few metres behind them was rolling and breaking, and that must have been quite terrifying.
The suburb today shows few outward signs of the disaster. Where 67 houses once stood, there are now playing fields. Abbotsford is again a growing suburb, but many of the victims have left.
Well, I think some of those people have restructured their lives and have gone on and done well, but they will still be carrying the scars of the event with them. There are other families, Mark, who really suffered a great deal because of the slip, and some people some people just don't have the resilience to cope with such major shock, and some of them have found it very difficult.
We believed it was the best place to live then, and we still believe it's the best place. The ground we're standing on now is probably the most tested ground in New Zealand.
Nevertheless, he says not all families who survived the disaster have remained intact.
I think the worst effects I know is that some of the families did split up, and we're given to understand that that's partly caused or mainly caused by what they went through at the time.
The Abbotsford disaster brought changes to the law, giving civil defence greater powers and providing victims of later disasters with faster, more effective help.
I think one of the things that, a good thing that came out of it, is that public authorities have now learnt that they have got a much higher level of responsibility for making sure that where people are allowed to settle is safe and secure. And I think local authorities are generally accepting that.
As for the community of Abbotsford, there are now stronger ties than there once were.
I think that the people who are left on the hill are all very good friends and a lot closer to each other, but I think the whole Green Island community really got together and has never lost the community spirit that was gained at that time. So I believe that's very positive.
A Port Chalmers woman who was upset 2 years ago when she found earth piled on top of her recently buried husband's grave now has another problem. This time it relates to the plot alongside her husband's, which she bought 2 years ago.
Doug Marshall had been dead only a fortnight when his widow found his grave looking like this. The contractor who digs the graves had dumped the spoil from 3 on top. The story made the newspapers, and Mrs. Marshall got a letter of apology from the Port Chalmers Borough Council. Since then, she's been a critic of the cemetery. She points to things like these year-old graves still roughly covered, and an open new grave which she believes is a safety hazard. But it's what's happened to part of her own plot next to her husband's that's her major concern. Another woman has been buried there, and Wynne Marshall says she's been asked by the borough to decide what to do about it.
Well, I feel it's up to them to really make the decision. It's not really up to me. I still want that plot, and I think it's up to them to make the arrangements to move her over another 2 foot.
She says it won't be easy for the family of the woman in her plot.
I don't really think it's very nice to think that you've got to have someone being moved. If it was the reverse, I would say no. I mean, most people would, wouldn't they? They'd say no.
Port Chalmers Borough says a mistake has been made and it has plans to deal with the situation. But the borough has declined to say what those plans involve.
Dunedin's Anglican Synod is being asked to stop the dispersal of books from the library at Selwyn College. Several thousand have been given to Knox College since Selwyn stopped being used as a theological college. Here's John again.
Until the 70s, Selwyn was one of several institutions in New Zealand for the training of Anglican clergy. A fine new library named after a Selwyn College benefactor was opened to house the thousands of books, many of them relating to the Christian faith. But since theological training's been centred in Auckland, the library's had little use.
We decided that because the library was not being used and in some ways was being damaged and couldn't be properly supervised and maintained, that we would select a certain number of books and incorporate them into the Hewitson Library at Knox College.
Even now there are preparations to send more books away. The imprint on the carpet shows where many more have been. But a Dunedin doctor is asking the Synod to put a stop to the dispersal. He wants a list compiled of books that have gone and a commission appointed to look at the origin, ownership and future of the books.
Well, I've personally made use of it quite a bit, and I know a number of other people who have. And I think there's much greater scope for people to use it. After all, the Roman Catholic Church has its own diocesan library, which is quite heavily used. And if we're not using it, it's perhaps a condemnation of us, rather than of the library.
I believe the Board of Governors took a good decision, and it can be justified. But we have to accept that the Synod has some right to say what it feels about it too.
The decision will be made by the Anglican Synod, which ends in Dunedin tomorrow.
It's a cold and dark time of year for the hundreds of people who get up early to deliver morning papers. But Simon Williams has discovered a South Canterbury delivery rider who's been able to do something about the dark.
Sarah Patrick is 14. Very early each morning, she goes to get her bike out. She's one of a small army in South Canterbury who deliver the papers. It means riding in the dark, and for Sarah, that means special precautions. In her 3 months on the job, she's found ordinary bike lights too small. So her father went to a wrecker's and bought an old motorbike lighting set.
We had ordinary batteries on there, and that was starting to cost a bit much, so because the batteries would keep running out. So Dad went to the wrecker's and got the battery and the light.
For $35, Sarah now has a good view of the road. But more importantly, everyone can see her.
Nothing like initiative. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night.